Whenever someone talks about what happened to Diana, they blame the palace. They blame the system. They blame the institution. Those aren't the villains. The villains have names. They made specific decisions on specific dates. And I'm going to name every one of them. For nearly 30 years, this story has been told in the passive voice. The palace failed her. The institution turned its back. Every time someone reaches for that language, they're doing a favor for the actual people who made the actual decisions. Because palaces don't sign memos. Systems don't pick up the phone and choose not to call. People do. And the people who did it to Diana had offices with brass plaques on the doors, titles after their names, and careers that continued, comfortably, quietly, long after she was buried. So let's stop protecting them. Diana herself didn't use euphemisms. In 1991 and 1992, she recorded a series of tapes, smuggled out of Kensington Palace by her friend Dr. James Colthurst and delivered to biographer Andrew Morton. Those tapes became Diana, Her True Story, published in June 1992, and they detonated like a bomb inside Buckingham Palace. On them, Diana didn't blame a faceless institution. She described, in specific and devastating detail, the senior palace officials who controlled her diary, restricted her public role, and squeezed her out inch by inch. She called them the enemy. She called them the gray men. Not a metaphor, her words. Recorded on cassette tape, smuggled out by Colthurst and delivered to Morton, the world heard her say it, read her words in black and white, and then went right back to blaming the system. Let's start where she started. Robert Fellows, private secretary to the Queen from 1990 to 1999. That made him the single most powerful, unelected official in the British monarchy, the Queen's chief advisor, her gatekeeper, her strategist, during the exact years Diana's world was disassembled piece by piece. But here's what separates Fellows from every other courtier in this story. He was Diana's brother-in-law, married to her older sister, Lady Jane Spencer. Sit with that for a second. The man advising the Queen on how to handle the Diana problem, the separation, the divorce, the title, the security, was married to Diana's own sister. Same family holidays, same bloodline running through the next generation. And when the Crown's interests collided with Diana's interests, as they did relentlessly from 1992 onward, Robert Fellows chose the Crown. Every single time. He didn't just observe the process, he ran it. He coordinated the household response during the separation announced in December 1992. He managed the institutional machinery during divorce negotiations that stretched through 1995 and 1996. He oversaw the process that stripped Diana of her HRH title. He administered the reclassification that moved her outside the perimeter of state security protection, all while being, technically, family. All while his wife, Diana's sister, presumably still exchanged Christmas cards with the woman whose life he was systematically dismantling on behalf of the Crown. His reward? In 1999, 2 years after Diana died in a Paris tunnel without protection, Robert Fellows was elevated to the peerage. Baron Fellows of Shottisham. He settled into the comfortable obscurity of the House of Lords, never publicly questioned about the conflict of interest. Not once. Never asked to account for a single decision he made about his own sister-in-law. The system didn't fail Diana. Robert Fellows served the system, and the system returned the favor with a title and a seat in the Lords. Beneath him sat Robin Janvrin, Deputy Private Secretary, part of the operational layer that implemented decisions about Diana's post-separation life, the shrinking of her engagements calendar, the narrowing of which causes she could champion, the quiet, bureaucratic strangulation that turned the most dynamic woman in the royal family into someone running a skeleton household out of Kensington Palace with almost no institutional support. Think about what that means in practical terms. Diana had been the biggest draw in royal life, the person the crowds actually came to see. And these men's response to that was to reduce her operation to the bare minimum while the full weight of the palace apparatus continued to serve Charles. Janvrin succeeded Fellows as private secretary after Fellows's departure, served until 2007, knighted, then made Baron Janvrin. Career uninterrupted. Consequences? None. Above them both, in the formal household hierarchy, sat David Ogilvy, the 13th Earl of Airlie, Lord Chamberlain from 1984 to 1997, the senior officer of the royal household, responsible for its organization and administration across a tenure that encompassed Diana's separation and divorce. When the Wales household was divided after the separation, Airlie's office executed the split. When Diana's post-separation existence was restructured, fewer staff, fewer resources, diminishing support, Lord Airlie's machinery handled the details. He presided over an apparatus that progressively stripped Diana of operational backing while maintaining the polite fiction that she was still part of the family. It was his office that managed the logistics of making someone disappear while technically remaining in the building. And managing the public narrative through all of this? Geoffrey Crawford, press secretary to the Queen. His office controlled what the palace said to journalists, what it briefed on background, how Diana was discussed in official communications. The palace press operation during the divorce wasn't neutral. It couldn't be. It served the institution, which meant containing Diana's public impact while shielding Charles's long-term image. Crawford's team ensured the palace's carefully managed version reached the broadsheets and the broadcasters. Diana? She was left to fend for herself with a fraction of the media resources, a skeleton press operation, and the understanding that every word she spoke publicly would be treated by the palace as a hostile act. These four men weren't distant figureheads. They worked in the same corridors Diana walked through. They saw her at official functions. They knew about the bulimia she'd battled since 1981, a fact she described in harrowing detail on the Morton tapes. They knew about the self-harm. Diana told Morton she'd thrown herself down a staircase at Sandringham while pregnant, that she'd cut herself with razor blades, that she'd cried out for help. These weren't secrets by 1992. The tapes existed. The book was published. The men running the palace knew exactly what they were dealing with, a woman in acute psychological distress, and their response was to manage her as a public relations liability rather than help her as a human being. They weren't ignorant. They were efficient. And then there was the committee that gave them their orders, the Way Ahead Group. Convened in the wreckage of 1992, the year the Queen herself called her annus horribilis. And what a year it was. In June, Andrew Morton's book exploded onto the bestseller lists with Diana's account of her miserable marriage. In August, The Sun published the Squidgygate transcripts, and in December, Charles and Diana's separation was formally announced. The monarchy looked like it was coming apart at the seams. The Way Ahead Group was the response. Its membership? Queen Elizabeth, Prince Philip, Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, plus the senior household officials already named, Fellows, Janvrin, the Lord Chamberlain's team. Its purpose? To discuss the monarchy's future and manage the crisis. Its discussions about Diana were private. Its minutes have never been published. But the outcomes are written across everything that followed. Diana progressively sidelined, her role narrowed, her support reduced. Her public presence treated not as an asset, but as a threat to be contained. Every decision that diminished Diana between 1993 and 1997 was consistent with a strategy. That strategy was formed somewhere. This is where. Which brings us from the gray men to the family itself. The courtiers executed the strategy, but strategy requires sanction. The royals made choices, Or they made the equally devastating choice to do nothing at all. Prince Philip wrote a series of letters to Diana during the separation in the early 1990s. Those letters were examined during the 2008 inquest into her death, where portions were read into the public record. Philip's defenders called them frank advice from a concerned father-in-law. Diana's account was different. She found some of them initially sympathetic. One reportedly acknowledged Charles had been silly to risk everything with Camilla. But as the correspondence continued, she described the tone as turning increasingly aggressive. Bullying. The language of a man accustomed to obedience, not negotiation. What isn't in dispute is this. Philip was immovably in Charles's camp. He didn't intervene during Diana's mental health crises. He didn't use his considerable influence, and within the family, Philip's influence was enormous, to broker a more humane separation. He didn't advocate for the mother of his grandchildren to be treated with basic decency during the most vulnerable period of her life. His letters read like communications from a man who viewed Diana primarily as a problem. For his son, for the crown, for the line of succession, not as a person in pain. He never publicly addressed his letters or his role, not a word. Queen Elizabeth is the most complicated figure here, because her failures were failures of omission. She didn't, by most accounts, actively work against Diana, but she didn't protect her either. And when you're the most powerful woman in the country, when a single word from you can redirect the entire apparatus of the palace, the decision not to act is itself an act. When Diana was battling bulimia and self-harm, suffering described in visceral, unbearable detail on the Morton tapes, the Queen didn't intervene. No documented instance of arranging mental health support for her daughter-in-law. No documented instance of confronting Charles about his ongoing relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles while still married to Diana. No documented instance of using the authority she absolutely possessed to ensure Diana received adequate care. Diana herself said the Queen was not approachable on personal matters. She described being told the Queen simply didn't know what to do. And so, the Queen did nothing. For years. Then, in December 1995, the Queen wrote to both Charles and Diana. Not to ask how they were coping, not to offer support. She wrote recommending a swift divorce. The letter wasn't an act of cruelty. The Queen likely saw it as practical. But the message was unmistakable. It's time to go. The Queen Mother was, by multiple accounts, actively hostile. A woman who saw duty and silence as the highest virtues, and who viewed Diana's public emotionalism, the tears, the interviews, the book, as an unforgivable betrayal of the code. She was openly hostile after Diana's cooperation with Morton. Princess Margaret, who'd been denied her own chance at happiness when prevented from marrying Peter Townsend in the 1950s, met Diana's resistance not with the empathy of shared experience, but with resentment, as if Diana's willingness to fight the system was an insult to Margaret's own compliance decades earlier. Princess Anne was publicly cool and maintained firm distance throughout. Not one of these women picked up a telephone during Diana's lowest moments. Not one used her position within the family to say, "This woman is suffering, and we need to do something about it." Their silence was a choice, and choices have consequences. Now, from the family that looked away to the team that went on the attack, Charles didn't wage his media war alone. He had professionals, and the first name you need is Richard Aylard, private secretary to the Prince of Wales from 1991 to 1996. Aylard was the architect of the single most damaging media decision of the entire marriage collapse, the Jonathan Dimbleby Project, both the ITV documentary and the accompanying biography. On June 29, 1994, the documentary aired. Charles admitted on camera to adultery with Camilla Parker Bowles, telling Dimbleby he'd been faithful to Diana until the marriage had irretrievably broken down. That phrasing, so careful, so lawyered, was designed to make the infidelity sound like a reasonable response rather than a betrayal. This was positioned as honesty, courage, a future king being candid with his people. What it actually was, a calculated media strategy to reposition Charles as a sympathetic truth-teller, and every ounce of the cost was dumped on Diana. The next morning's newspapers didn't praise Charles's candor. They screamed about the affair. Fresh scrutiny, fresh humiliation. Diana's marriage failures splashed across every front page again. The entire country debating her private life again. And all of it because Eilard made the calculation that Charles's long-term rehabilitation required the public confession. Diana's well-being? Not part of his equation, not even a variable. Then came Mark Boland. He arrived in 1996 as Charles's deputy private secretary with a razor-sharp brief. Rehabilitate Charles, normalize Camilla, manage the narrative. Boland had previously worked at the Press Complaints Commission, the very body supposed to protect people like Diana from media abuse. So he understood British media from the inside, knew which editors to call, knew which journalists could be relied upon to run a story without asking too many questions. His method was simple and ruthless. Cultivate relationships with senior journalists. Feed them a carefully shaped story. Charles as warm, devoted father and thoughtful future king. Camilla as his quiet, dignified companion who'd waited patiently. And Diana? Difficult, unstable, unreasonable, erratic. Boland grasped something essential. Diana's image and Charles's image were a zero-sum game. Elevate one, you had to diminish the other. So he diminished her, systematically, through carefully placed briefings that multiple journalists later confirmed receiving. Press circles nicknamed him Blackadder, after the scheming television character, and he wore the name without apparent discomfort. After leaving Charles's service in 2002, he transitioned smoothly into private sector public relations, entirely unscathed, thriving. The briefings against Diana didn't slow his career. They were his career. And then there was Tiggy Legg Burke. Hired in 1993 as a companion to Princes William and Harry during Charles's custody periods, officially a practical arrangement, someone to supervise the boys when Charles was occupied with duties. Diana experienced it as something far more pointed, a young, aristocratic woman positioned in the maternal role that belonged to Diana, spending time with her sons in the settings Diana was increasingly excluded from. The photographs told the story Diana couldn't bear. Legg Burke laughing with the boys, accompanying them on holidays, being embraced by them at public events. For Diana, each image was a specific and targeted cruelty. Proof that she was being replaced not just as Charles's wife, but as the boys' accessible parent. Whether Legg Burke personally intended to cause pain is secondary. The decision to install her in that role, with that visibility, at that specific moment in the breakdown of Diana's marriage, was made by Charles's household. They knew how it would land. They did it anyway. Now we reach the two decisions that bridge symbolic cruelty and physical danger. The divorce was finalized on August 28, 1996. Diana's solicitor, Anthony Julius of Mishcon de Rea, negotiated a settlement of approximately £17 million and an annual office allowance. She kept her apartment at Kensington Palace. But she lost two things that mattered more than any sum of money, and the people who took them have names. First, her title. Diana lost the style Her Royal Highness. She became Diana, Princess of Wales, still technically a princess, but stripped of the three letters that signaled she belonged. Multiple accounts, from Diana's own statements to friends, from the memoir of Patrick Jeffson, her private secretary, indicate the Queen was prepared to let Diana keep the HRH. It was Charles who insisted it be removed. Diana reportedly told friends, "My husband has told me I must give it up." When she raised it directly with the Queen said she'd need to consult Charles. Charles vetoed it. This wasn't bureaucratic inevitability. This wasn't protocol asserting itself. It was a decision made by a specific person. Charles. Executed by fellows. Administered by the Lord Chamberlain's office. It was punishment, dressed as process, and it set up the second loss, the one that connects directly to the night she died. After the divorce, without the HRH, Diana was no longer automatically entitled to protection from the Metropolitan Police's Royalty and Specialist Protection Command. She fell into an ambiguous category, no longer a working royal, still the mother of the future king. And here's what you need to understand. The security loss wasn't a separate decision made by separate people. It was the direct downstream consequence of stripping her title. Charles insisted she lose the HRH. Fellows formalized the change. The Lord Chamberlain's office administered the reclassification from royal to private citizen. And that reclassification was the trigger that moved Diana outside the category of persons who automatically received round-the-clock state protection. Charles created the status change. Fellows executed it. The bureaucratic machinery carried Diana outside the security perimeter. Every link in that chain has a name. It gets darker. Diana was offered a reduced protection arrangement after the divorce, but by then, she'd come to distrust the royal protection officers assigned to her, believing, with good reason, that they reported her movements, her visitors, her private life back to the palace. Years of surveillance had taught her that palace protection wasn't just protection, it was monitoring. It was control by another name. The system had so thoroughly weaponized the security apparatus against her privacy that she couldn't accept its protection even when offered, because protection came with surveillance attached. That's the darkest irony in this entire story. The culture of control drove Diana away from the very security apparatus that might have saved her life. On the night of August 31st, 1997, when her car entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris at speed, there was no trained royal protection officer in that vehicle. No advance route planning, no follow car. Just Henri Paul, an impaired driver with a blood alcohol level more than 3 times the French legal limit, and Trevor Rees-Jones, a bodyguard employed by the Fayed family. She was 36, the most famous woman on earth, and completely unprotected by the state whose future king she'd borne. Now, the palace built Diana's prison from the inside. The British tabloid press built it from the outside. And the men who ran those papers weren't abstractions either. They had desks and editorial budgets and the power to decide every single morning whose photograph went on the front page. Kelvin Mackenzie, editor of The Sun from 1981 to 1994. Under his watch, The Sun published the Squidgygate transcripts in August 1992. Recordings of an intimate phone conversation between Diana and James Gilby, originally captured on New Year's Eve, 1989. The tapes caught Diana speaking candidly about her unhappiness, her sense of being mistreated by the royal family, her emotional distress. Private words spoken in what she believed was a private conversation. Mackenzie didn't agonize over publishing them. He splashed them across the front page and watched the circulation numbers climb. Diana's most vulnerable moments, monetized for newsstand profit. But the single most provable, most viscerally damaging act of media violation came from the Mirror Group. In 1993, a gym owner named Bryce Taylor secretly installed a hidden camera at the LA Fitness Gym in Isleworth, West London, and photographed Diana exercising. Photographed her without her knowledge, without her consent, in a space she believed was private, one of the few places she could go without being watched. Taylor sold the images. In November 1993, the Daily Mirror and Sunday Mirror published the photographs. Diana in her workout clothes, captured by a hidden lens, printed for millions to see. Diana was reportedly devastated. She called it an unbelievable betrayal, because that's exactly what it was. A woman being secretly photographed in a gym and having those images published in a national newspaper. The photographs sold papers, and no one was held to account. Piers Morgan. He became editor of the Daily Mirror in November 1995, 2 years after the gym photographs were published, and ran the paper through the final 2 years of Diana's life. Under Morgan, the Mirror remained one of the primary purchasers of paparazzi imagery, one of the primary engines of the tabloid Diana economy. And years later, he'd build an entire television career partly on his proximity to the Diana story. Let that sit. Stuart Higgins succeeded Mackenzie at The Sun and maintained the same editorial appetite: invasive coverage, paparazzi photographs purchased at premium rates, the relentless commercial machinery that made every image of Diana in distress worth money to whoever could capture it. And above them all, setting the commercial incentives that made the entire machine run: Rupert Murdoch. His News International empire owned The Sun and the News of the World, 2 of the most aggressive tabloids in British history. The business model was brutally simple. Diana photographs sold papers. Papers that sold well generated advertising revenue. Revenue justified the prices paid for paparazzi images. Higher prices incentivized more aggressive pursuit. Every motorcycle that chased Diana through London or Paris or the south of France was ultimately responding to a commercial signal that originated in Murdoch's business model and was amplified by his editor's daily decisions about what went on page 1. But here's the part that should make your blood run cold. After August 31st, 1997, every one of these men mourned. Their papers ran black-bordered front pages, tributes, retrospectives, solemn columns about the tragedy, editorials lamenting the loss of a generation. Kelvin Mackenzie, who'd published her most private conversations, the Mirror editors who'd published her stolen gym photographs, Piers Morgan, who'd kept the tabloid Diana economy humming, Stuart Higgins, who'd kept the paparazzi economy running. They wept in print for the woman they'd hounded in life. And the hypocrisy wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. It was on the front page, dated, bylined, provable. You can go to the British Library right now and pull the editions. The same newspapers that paid for the chase ran the morning coverage. Same mastheads, same editors, same desks. So what happened to all these people? Here's the accountability ledger. Robert Fellows, elevated to Baron Fellows of Shottisham, took his seat in the House of Lords, never subjected to a single public inquiry about his conflict of interest, lived out his remaining years in quiet dignity. Robin Janvrin, knighted, then elevated to Baron Janvrin, succeeded Fellows as private secretary. Career continued without so much as a stumble. Richard Aylard, left Charles's service, moved into the private sector. The Dimbleby documentary that blew up Diana's life? A line on his CV. No public accountability. Not ever. Mark Boland transitioned from diminishing Diana into lucrative private PR work. The briefings against her didn't damage his reputation. They demonstrated his effectiveness. Piers Morgan went from the Mirror's editor's chair to television fame on both sides of the Atlantic, built a media brand. His role in the tabloid Diana economy never slowed him down, not for a single day. Kelvin Mackenzie continued in media commentary and business, never held to account for Squidgygate or any of the coverage that turned Diana's private suffering into public entertainment. The Queen Mother died in 2002 without ever publicly addressing Diana's treatment. Prince Philip never publicly acknowledged any responsibility for the letters, the hostility, or the family's collective failure to protect the mother of his grandsons. And the Queen never said publicly, not once, "I could have done more." No inquiries into the courtiers' decisions, no professional consequences for the editors who fueled the pursuit, no reckoning for the family members who chose silence while Diana drowned. Not a single person on this list was ever held accountable in any formal or professional capacity for any of the decisions I've just described. We've been saying the system failed Diana for 27 years, and that phrase has functioned beautifully, efficiently, as a shield for every single person named in this script. Because you can't hold a system accountable. You can't look a system in the eye. You can't ask a system why it didn't pick up the phone, why it stripped a woman of her protection, why it chose reputation management over basic human decency. But you can ask Robert Fellows. You can ask Piers Morgan. You can ask the members of the Way Ahead group what they discussed in those private meetings and why the outcome was always Diana losing something else. The system didn't fail Diana. These people did. And now you know their names. Subscribe for more stories like this.